All right. You ready now?
I'm ready now.
Okay. So, deeper learning. What is it and why is it important today?
Deeper learning is what every student needs in today's society. Deeper learning is about, yes, having basic academic core content knowledge. It's what you do with it. It's how you apply it. And so what deeper learning is the ability to think critically and creatively, to work with others in teams, to collaborate, to be able to communicate what you're learning and applying it. And I think most importantly, deeper learning is about students learning how to learn, because for all the rest of their lives, they're going to be having to learn constantly, and they're going to have to be doing it largely on their own. So being master of your own learning.
You have a chance to visit a lot of schools around the country. When you visit a New Tech school, what do you see that leads you to say this is deeper learning in action?
What I see in New Tech schools is I see student engagement. I'm a big believer in my observation is that students learn best by doing. We all do. And so at New Tech schools, I see students engaged with each other. I see them working on projects that are relevant to them. I see them not only learning core academic content knowledge that they have to apply to whatever situation they're working in, but they're also working across discipline lines. They're working with each other and sharing ideas. And of course, they're also presenting, and that's its own, I think, valuable exercise. So at New Tech schools, I see the kind of engagement that they're going to be doing all the rest of their lives.
You know, innovation is talked about a lot in education. How do you describe it, and maybe even what it is and what it isn't as you think about a topic that we hear about?
Innovation to me is simply what is it that I need to be doing now and perhaps in a different way in order to be more effective, to reach a lot more students, to truly be adapting to modern times. And so innovation is something that's been with us from time immemorial. But it's how we approach innovation and the willingness to consider ideas, the willingness to say, how do I change my practice? What are the conditions that a student is working under now or growing up under that perhaps wasn't the situation 50 years ago. And so innovation is a combination of evaluating what it is that a student needs, what it is I need to be doing to improve my practice or how I'm delivering education, and also recognize and trying to be ahead. How is it that I can be improving this process? Innovation isn't something to be afraid of. We innovate every moment of our lives, and in fact, whether we're at home figuring out a new way of doing something, or in our workplace, or in a hobby, so innovation isn't something to be afraid of. Innovation is to be embraced, and understanding that in this society, innovation is a way of life. How do we now innovate successfully and encourage others to do so?
So how would you say an organization like New Tech can be a powerful partner for a district wanting to innovate?
With New Tech, what you get is you get a partner that is innovating, and you don't have to go it alone. What I like about systems such as New Tech is that this is New Tech is something that's across the country. It understands the need for flexibility, and yet at the same time has a proven model. And so it's not like every school district has to reinvent the innovative process. You've got a partner to help you through it and who will help you innovate, and particularly innovate to where you want to be, understanding that New Tech also has its tenets of education that have proven successful, and that you're going to be involved in, I think, some of the most cutting-edge education processes in the country: the engagement, the deeper learning, the personalized learning, project-based. All of these become much more than simple labels with New Tech.
You've had a chance to be both have experience from a state level, and then recently certainly the Alliance for Excellent Education, really looking at national policy. I'm wondering if you could talk about the connection between the desire to innovate and now what will be state-led efforts in that area.
This is a golden opportunity for state and district leaders, because to whatever extent there was a heavy federal role, it's pretty much gone. And so for state and district leaders, this is a chance to not only put your aspirations down, but it's also a chance then to do the planning necessary for the implementation. We know this. We know that every student is going to have to graduate with a college and career-ready set of standards. We know that every student has certain demands that are going to be put upon them that weren't on students necessarily 50 years ago. And we know that it has to apply to all students, regardless of income, race, ethnicity, whatever. And so now every state and district leader has the opportunity to really say, this is what we seek to do, and now let's put it into action. There won't be a heavy federal mandate on you, except a plan. And that's what I think is so exciting, is that state and district leaders now have an opportunity from a combination of events. They've been doing a lot of it naturally. Pedagogy is changing, practice is changing, standards have been going up, expectations of students have been going up. So technology is now being implemented in innovative and sweeping ways. So a lot has happened naturally, and now states and districts have this opportunity to put it down in their plans for how they're truly going to advance deeper learning, which is pretty much what most people realize needs to be done. So now states and districts have the opportunity to plan, to aspire in their plans, and then also say what they want to do to implement.
Talk a little bit about what you see in the field of teaching. You know, it's both been maligned in terms of, I think, some unfair perceptions that teachers are resistant to change or innovation, but is it a golden age and era as well for teachers in that profession?
I believe that teaching can be entering a golden age. I just finished chairing for 6 years the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards, and what I learned and the respect I learned for the teaching profession, but I also learned about how it is a profession. And I believe that more and more teachers are stepping up and saying, we are professionals, we expect to be treated like professionals, and as professionals we can set our standards, we can determine our forms of practice, we can learn from each other. Both the combination of improved pedagogy and personalization of learning and technology makes it possible to have teaching communities of practice that didn't exist before. So it can be a golden age of teaching, but I think we also need to make sure that we're supporting and respecting our teachers. And what is good for students, the deeper learning, the personalized learning, that's also equally good for teachers. The ability for teachers to personalize their practice, to learn by doing, and also to have their colleagues and peers that they can be interacting with.
And what would you say is the role that networks like New Tech Network can play in really elevating that teaching profession?
Well, a network like New Tech has the advantage of, particularly now that it's celebrating its 20th anniversary, of 20 years of experience. And so there have been successes, there have been failures, there have been some adjustments and readjustments, and so you don't have to come into this thing starting all over again. What New Tech brings you is that experience, and what New Tech brings you is a uniform approach in the sense of learning platform, but uniqueness to each individual district and its particular needs. So that's what I think New Tech brings. New Tech is not a stranger in this, and there's a value, as I've gotten older, I've learned there's a value to experience. And so New Tech brings both the experience, but also the experience of innovation, knowing that nothing is static, and that you must keep moving ahead, you must keep innovating, you must keep adjusting and meeting the needs of students where they are. I think this is particularly important to the teaching profession as it seeks to define itself as a true profession, to set its own standards, to set its own pedagogy, to set determinations of what is success in teaching, and also its own ways of helping its peers develop. So New Tech offers all of this.
What would you say has changed the most in the use of technology in schools in the last 5 years?
In the last 5 years, two things have changed. One is technology has now become ubiquitous. It's no longer the one-off or the simple one item in the budget. The second thing that I think is most significant about technology is it is interactive. All the technology for the last 50 years has been basically one way. We showed videos, we showed clips, we did Scantrons, but it was a one-way process. Today, technology is interactive in the sense that the student and the teacher, the student is interacting with his or her learning experience. And that's a complete new world. You think about a child who's 20 years, or someone who's 20 years old today, they were born in the year that Google was created, and as well as New Tech. And so they have grown up learning a particular way. Well, so that's the difference, I think, with technology today versus 5 years ago and certainly 20 years ago, which is interactive, virtual, and it's part of the learning environment, not just a separate item that you do an hour a day.
What do you think some of the biggest challenges facing communities are as they begin to recognize the need to change the teaching and learning practices and aren't quite sure how fast to go about it or even where to turn?
I think obviously there's some significant challenges out there. The greatest one is inertia. Nothing else in our society is being done essentially the way it was 15 or 20 years ago. And the same is true with education, and most importantly with educational needs. Human knowledge doubling every 3 to 5 years, but our brains aren't doubling at the same capacity. So we have to find ways that we can continue to learn and to adapt and to synthesize what we're learning, to apply it to real-world situations, help students find how to learn. So that, to me, is the real challenge. If I were a parent, and sometimes it's tough to look at, well, what is it they're doing at this school? If I were a parent, first of all, be involved and understand, and then also look realistically at what it is that my child is going to be expected to know in order to be successful. What is it that I've had to know in order to be successful in just the last 5 years? And I warrant that most parents aren't doing their jobs the same way they were 5 to 10 years ago. So what I think is important is for communities is to take honest stock of what it is we want for our students, what it is that we know they're going to need to know, and then what is it we need to do to support our superintendent, our district leadership, and others to get there. One thing they can look at is, if we don't have that capacity built in or we need help, are there intermediaries, a New Tech for instance and others, but are there intermediaries that can help us get there?
Do you think one of the challenges that we face is that we as Americans have a very short tolerance for wanting results? I wonder where expectations for how fast we should be able to see things changed, how that factors in making these deep changes in teaching and learning.
What I've observed about education is we have a short tolerance on wanting results. We want improved educational outcomes quickly. We're not so good on what I've observed about education is we have a short tolerance for wanting improved results. We want our educational outcomes improved right away. What we're not so patient about, or what we actually take the longer view on, is what to do about it. And so we want better results, but we're really going to dig in our heels on what it takes to get there. And so what we need to do is to combine the two. And the next several years, I think, are critical in this country because every state and all 15,000 school districts have the opportunity to not only put down their aspirations for what they want for students, but also how to implement it. So the next 3 to 5 years will set the stage for the next 20. And that's where I think it's important that parents are involved and others. What is it that we want for our students? What is it that we need to do in order to get it, particularly within the school district?
What, as you think about the business community and really expectations that they have for what they want public schools to produce, what would you say to them about what you see that encourages you the most about the changes taking place?
I'd actually flip it around. I'd ask the business community what it is that they're looking for, and then have them communicate that to the community. The reason I say is because what I hear from the business community overwhelmingly is they want the deeper learning outcomes. They want employees that now, yes, have certain basic core academic content knowledge, but they also understand that that employee is going to need to be re-educated countless times in the workplace. And so they want an employee who knows how to keep learning, who can communicate and work with others. And then the business community communicating that, and they'll find that they're in total alliance with the parents in the community, the teachers in the community, the superintendent, and so on. What I find fascinating and important is that the interests of the business community, the interests of the civil rights community, the interests of the parent community, they're inextricable now. It used to be you could say, well, this is a civil rights issue, this is an economic issue, this is a parent issue, public engagement issue. They're all inextricably combined, because the reality is that every student's individual success also, and their own individual economic success depends upon their educational success. And that therefore the business community, the parent community, the teaching community, we're all in this one together. We have the same needs, we have the same outcomes, we've identified them as such, and we need to work together to determine what it is we need to be able to get there.
And to school board members, who face really very significant fiscal challenges. This sounds like investment is needed to really support these kinds of changes. How do we reconcile what is really tough economics and the need to do things differently?
I would approach it two ways. First of all, I'd say, what is it I'm trying to do, and what is it I know needs to be done? And then what is the system that I need to develop in order to get there? In many cases, you may already be on track, quality teaching, for instance, in certain situations, technology investments that have been made and are working successfully. But then other places you may need to change what you're doing. Look, we've got a situation in this country where we've raised our standards significantly. Every state says college and career ready standards are the norm now. We have less dollars actually to implement that. We have changing methods of teaching, the role of the teacher, and we have technology that's making a big difference too. We're not going to be able to keep, so standards are up, less dollars available. We have to change what we're doing. We have to innovate. And that's not a bad thing, because if in that innovation we decide we're not going to keep teaching as we have for 500 years, but we're going to take what's good in teaching practice, and then we're going to assist the teacher to develop skills in their profession such that they become even more effective, they can personalize learning, they can meet the student where they are, and they can produce higher student learning outcomes that are really relevant to the student's success. That's what it's all about. So if I were a school board member, and that's one of the toughest jobs, I think, in the country, but if I were a school board member, I'd take this opportunity to say, what is it that we seek to do in this district for student learning outcomes, identify those, and now what is it we need to do to get there? That's a lot different than simply saying we're going to do the same thing plus add 3%.
How do you think we can go about changing the perception that public schools are broken in this country?
I think public schools. So let me think on this one for a second.
Yeah.
So I would ask, what is it you want our public schools to do? What we want our public schools to do is to educate our children, and we want them to be educated to what it is they need to learn, not what it is that we've been teaching them for the past 50 to 100 years. I don't think public schools are broken. I think what public schools are doing is going through what everything else in our society is going through, which is a period of re-examination, recognizing that the rules have changed significantly, that there's a much greater need for certain student learning outcomes, and that now and the ability of public schools is that once that's made, those determinations are made, we can move quickly to implement them for students across every spectrum. I don't think public schools are broken. I think that public schools are going through what every other aspect of our society, whether it's healthcare or you name it, is going through, which is how do we function in a modern society rapidly changing, and particularly where the demands upon us have increased significantly. That's a challenge, but it's not an impossible setback, and actually offers us some exciting opportunities. One of the benefits in this situation is we have 15,000 school districts. We have a number of school leaders and school districts that are making courageous decisions, that are innovative, that are hard chargers. We work with them. New Tech certainly works with them. And so what I see more and more school leaders that are saying, we know we have to change. Now, how do we begin the public engagement process to get the support to do it? For an elected public school board member, one of the toughest jobs ever is, I have to say that elected school board members, that's the one position I never had the courage to run for. That is one of the toughest jobs ever. It becomes even more significant right now because in every school district in this country, they have the opportunity to begin planning with their superintendent, with their leadership, with their parents, with their public, about not only what they aspire to for their students, to set the student learning outcomes, how they're going to intervene in their lowest performing schools, but also how they're going to implement an overall student learning centered plan. It's an exciting time, I think, to be an elected official. Also a very challenging one, but an exciting one.
What would you counsel a young person to go into education today? And if so, what do you see in the future that would have you counsel that person to pursue that?
What I'd counsel a young person to go into education today is, where else are you going to have the opportunity to affect 30 to 150 lives a year to make a meaningful difference. And assuming that we are truly moving towards more deeper learning outcomes, the ability to bring personalized learning, you are going to be entering one of the most personally challenging and satisfying professions. Now, this is assuming that you've got the tools that you need, that you're getting constantly the professional development on an ongoing and consistent basis that you need. Yes, and salary is important too. But where else are you going to, you're a true professional. I take my child to a doctor, and the doctor looks at my child and looks at and uses data to determine what's the best course for a healthy development, or perhaps if there's a problem, what to do about it. That's what a teacher does every day. And the ability to help that student. Somebody told me, a superintendent told me one time, I went to visit several schools in a district, and he said, you came to look at the technology, but I want you to look at the teacher and understand that in this school district, we consider every teacher to be a professional designer, that they are helping design the academic pathway, the education pathway for every child. That's the mark of a professional.
And back a little bit to what supports an organization like New Tech can do in ongoing professional learning. I wonder how you would characterize this, the need to adopt a sense of schools learning themselves, or that notion of really being on a path for continuous improvement, which is certainly evident in the business world, has not been an experience in the K-12 education.
Well, every school does have to. No one can be content to do things as they have done them for the last 50 years and think they're going to be successful. And what's the point in making the significant public expenditure to do that? Instead, every school needs to be a learning community. Schools need to model the same behavior that we're asking of our students. And we're asking our students to be engaged. We're asking them to be innovative. We're asking them to communicate with others and to advance. We need to ask our teachers and give our teachers the resources to be able to do the same thing, and the same thing with schools. We also have to be willing to say, quite frankly, there may times be some failure, that we will learn from it quickly and we will adjust. But the idea that you can continue simply doing things the way we have done them since, somebody said, the University of Bologna 800 years ago, and think that we're going to be successful. These students are in a world that is fast moving and fast changing. They're not going to be sitting in classrooms for all their lives. They're not going to be rewarded based upon how long they sit in a seat versus how well they're performing. They're going to be getting their learning in a variety of different ways, not simply having somebody lecture to them. And so this is about innovation, and this is about a time in American education to make critical decisions about what it is we want and how we're going to get there.
What role can deeper learning, or the strive for deeper learning, play in really addressing the equity issues that we face in this country?
Deeper learning what we have to recognize is that deeper learning outcomes are for all school children, not just for those of certain income or race or geographic location. That in today's society, all children are going to need the same deeper learning outcomes. There are no jobs anymore, literally, that require less than a high school diploma or even just a high school diploma. They require post-secondary, and they require of some kind, and they require that you be able to take certain facts and do things with them. They require problem solving. They require the ability to be able to work in teams. And so if this is for all children, I don't care where you're going to end up working, you're going to have to be able to do this. There are no traditional industries anymore in the old sense. Even the most traditional industries require a deeper learning approach. And that's what I find it interesting. If you look at any survey of business organizations, Forbes, for instance, the Fortune 500 and others, and you look at what they thought was important in academic outcomes 25 years ago versus what they think is important today, it is flipped. And today, what leads the list, critical thinking, the ability to solve problems, the ability to communicate. Yes, core academic knowledge is important. You have to be able to do something with it. And that's what deeper learning is all about.
You know, there's a lot of interest these days in the makerspace. What do you see as the connection the makerspace movement has in deeper learning?
I think makerspace is important because it encourages creativity among students, both individually and collectively. It provides them a 24/7 learning experience. Maker spaces aren't always in schools. They're in many different places of the community. And it's another way of constantly engaging a child in what they find interesting and what's relevant. And what I have found, even in my own learning, is that if you get me hooked on something that interests me, it gets me interested then in looking beyond that, because now how do I apply some other areas that perhaps I wouldn't have been drawn to initially? How do I fill in the blank spaces as I'm working towards my goal, but I understand that I need some math over here, I need science application here, perhaps I need a linguistic ability or the ability to communicate here. That's what maker spaces are about. That's what deeper learning is about. That's what I value about project-based learning in New Tech.
Can you pause for 1 second?
While you do that, I want to get a comment in, and
Yeah.
you may want to put this in, you may not
Yeah.
somewhere. What I find the most jarring to anyone who questions whether or not we need deeper learning, the most jarring study came out recently from Georgetown University, in which of the 11.6 million jobs that have been created since the end of the recession in 2010, 11.6 million, less than 1% went to those with a high school diploma or less. 99% required more than a high school diploma. What that means is that high school is not adequate enough, but even more significantly, what you learned in high school isn't adequate, and you have to be able to apply what you've learned. That's what deeper learning is about.
Thank you, that was great. Krista, how are we doing on our
We're
topics?
doing great.
Yeah.
Some of the, I wrote down a few of the pieces that were just amazing. Flipping what work is looking, what
Mhm.
business community is looking for now, and the equity question.
You want me just to wing it?
Yep.
So equity is important for the moral value, but it's not equity anymore. Look at the demographics of this country. Half of the children in this country attending school today are children of color, ethnicity, and or low income or in poverty. This is a totally different demographic situation than existed 30 years ago. So we don't have a question, there's no question in this country anymore about the need to make sure that all of our children have deeper learning outcomes. The future of our country's national security, but also its economy, depends upon that one half of our children who are traditionally underserved. The future of our economy actually depends upon the one half of our kids in the schools today who are children of color and who are low income or in poverty. They have to do as well as the other students. And the reason is twofold. One is, yes, they're our workforce in an increasingly skilled economy. Even more importantly, they're our consumers. And so do you want a minimum wage worker walking into the realtor or the car dealer or whomever, or do you want somebody who's making $50 an hour? And I think we know the answer to that. Also, I need to turn my cell phone on. Did that one beep?
I don't think it was wrong, good.
No, I don't think so either.
Okay.
Randy, what should we be asking Bob to talk about? You're listening. You are leading a school like this every day. What do you?
I do want that. What's your hope for the
Yeah,
future?
yeah, I'll get there.
Yeah. I don't know. What I worry about are starting these things and being sustainable
Mhm.
and continuing the work when there's so much rollover in the people that support
Mhm.
me. Like when Kathy leaves, am I still going to be able to do this work?
Yeah.
Having the autonomy to do this work, how are those kinds of things going to be put in place for us?
So I might turn that into a question along the lines of, as innovative practices take hold, what positive impact will that have on educators?
You know, through the hub, we're going to be able to hook people up much faster. Okay.
Next film on that.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. The most important thing about innovative practices is being able to share them and getting positive results out. whether you call them proof points, lighthouses, whatever you want to call them. Success breeds success, and what people need to see is what's working. What I've been encouraged by as I travel across the country, I look at a number of different schools that are making great headway despite great considerable odds. What I've been struck by is I can find school districts that match every situation in this country where somebody may be saying, well, we can't do it here because we've got this situation or that situation. I can find a school district that looks just like you, and they are making a difference. So what we use in our schools to be innovative, technology, for instance, and people sharing their experiences and teachers forming communities of practice. We need to be doing the same thing across district lines and with district leaders, school board members, and so on. What is it that's working? What is it that shows promise? What is it that we can substantiate already? I also think it's important to the extent possible is to institutionalize, is for when that elected school board makes a decision, and they've got important decisions to make, is to understand you're going to have to be willing to go with that decision to make sure that you get it up and running in such a way that you can evaluate it. Doesn't mean you always have to stick with something or you can't adjust it, but there has to be sustainability if we're truly to have the confidence of the teaching profession, building leaders, even parents, in terms of what it is that we know needs to be done to improve learning outcomes for students.
Sustaining innovative work requires sort of grit and persistence that is sometimes hard to find when you face as many challenges as educators, school leaders, district leaders. What could you say to those who are on the front lines? And I think you just talked about how we have to have policymakers sustain, but this is really a change in expectations for what it is to be a school leader and a school teacher, and the hard work really never ends. So if there's no finish line, how do we stay motivated as an education?
There is no finish line, but there never is to the learning process. What I think is important is that we have come together as a community, the school, the elected board of school board, parents, and public, and we understand what our community needs as far as having its students achieve. Once identifying what it is, the deeper learning outcomes that we think are important for all students to have, then it gets easier to plan how to get there. And as you plan how to get there, what steps are going to be necessary in making sure the community is aware of it. One thing I've spent a lot of time on in the last several years is the importance of planning. You don't, in the case of technology, plan before you purchase, don't purchase and then plan. Well, what I've learned through the planning process is you don't want to have a plan just around one particular item. You have to first identify what your goals are for personalized student learning outcomes, deeper learning outcomes. Now, what is it in order to get there I need to do to improve my teaching, my professional development, my assessments and accountability, and with important pieces of community participation in there. That's the only way you're going to have initially a sustainable plan and one that people have buy-in. And sure, when you hit those rough spots, and people start challenging or raising questions, but at least now you've got a lot of people that you've been bringing along that understand the issues and can make a more informed decision. Sustainability in education has always been a problem, but I think that as we recognize more and more what are the deeper learning outcomes that our students need in order to be successful, and truly to not only for themselves, but to be able to elevate our own communities, to preserve our own communities, to provide the economic sustenance that's necessary for our communities, as we identify those, then there has to be a significant community participation, education, and awareness campaign so everybody's bought in and moving along at the same place.
Schools are often defined as good because of the assessments that are given and the state tests, and the reality is, and even Donald Trump said that our lower socioeconomic areas need to have better schools, but in my opinion, it's not so much the schools that are bad, it's the condition that needs to be addressed. Because if you take that school and that staff and you put them in the higher socioeconomic area, the test scores will stay the same. I'm sure of this because I've seen myself go to different schools and in different socioeconomic areas. How do we change that mindset that we really need to address the condition, not the school itself that as being bad. I mean,
You mean the environment that the students are coming from?
yeah, it definitely has something to do with the social, emotional, what they bring to school with them, the factors, the non-cognitive factors that are affecting them, those kinds of things. How are we going, because I think I see the administration that's coming as oh, we just need to do something to that school, we need to do something to that staff in those poor areas, and that will make it better, but it won't make it better
No.
because you're not addressing those non-cognitive factors that are coming to school.
Yeah, unfortunately, my editorial comment is the Trump administration will be addressing them far less and putting more weight on the emphasis on the school. But anyway, that's another matter. So, I'm glad to take a crack at it. Obviously, children come to schools from certain environments. They may be from low-income areas, they may be from traumatized situations, they may be from a wide range of situations. So children come each with their own needs, and some schools have a tougher road to go than others. So the first thing to do is to make sure that that school has the support that they need in order to meet those children where they are. And that's what deeper learning and personalized learning are about. It's meeting each student where he or she is. And that doesn't mean you make excuses for them, but what you do is you help them with what they need in order to be able to succeed. What I like about project-based learning, what I like about personalized learning is that by meeting each student where they are, you're taking into account what their particular conditions are. I have found that schools that tend to do the best are those that also recognize the outside needs of the student once they leave that schoolhouse, and that they are looking to see whether through counseling or through hooking up with social services or whatever, having a much more coordinated approach to meeting that student's needs. What I find interesting is that we sometimes are reluctant to make the investments we need in the overall child. And it's important to make sure that education process is everything. It's important to make sure that education process is a good one and a sound one. At the same time, recognizing that every student comes to school with a particular set of needs. And so how can they be addressed? And I'd rather spend a few $1,000s more per child and have a successful outcome than I would not to spend it, have the child go through 11 years, drop out, or finish school and then not be able to succeed. In my organization, we do a lot of economic analysis, and the return on investment from having a child graduate from high school and then be able to go to some sort of post-secondary learning experience afterwards, it pays off for the child, yes, because now they're a taxpayer, not a tax consumer. It also pays off for the community because they're generating far more economic activity than they would have otherwise. So it's a sound investment both from a moral standpoint and also a monetary one.
If you were to look out, let's say, gaze into the crystal ball, what do you think will cause the spread of deeper learning? What can accelerate that use? And describe what brings you the most hope as you look out on the landscape of education in the United States?
I'm very hopeful because I see a number of school leaders, business leaders, others that are embracing deeper learning outcomes. They may call them by different names, but they're embracing the outcomes, the core academic content knowledge and the ability of children to have the competencies necessary to succeed in today's society, problem solving, the ability to learn how to learn, to collaborate. I also see the opportunity during the next 3 to 5 years for a rapid expansion. It's about building demand and supply, and I put it in that order. Students, parents, the public demanding deeper learning outcomes because they recognize how important they are, and then in turn, organizations such as New Tech being able to supply. When the demand is being built, then there will be more support, more resources available for the new techs of the world to come and help make that happen. And that's, I think, important too, is to recognize that this is not a journey that someone has to start from scratch or on their own. This is a journey that many others have made. A lot of work has been done to get to deeper learning outcomes being documented as necessary, the pedagogy and practice that's there. And so the organizations like New Tech are able to have made this journey and are traveling this road all the time. They're able to help others and bring others along rapidly. That's what makes me optimistic, is knowing that what makes me very optimistic is knowing that there are those who have been traveling this road and who, as others come forward and say, this is what I want for our children, they can help them get there.
What do you think could be the positive contribution of networks of schools like New Tech Network? How will that help accelerate the spread?
I'd rather be in a network anytime than be out on my own, because in the network what I'm getting the combined experience of schools across the country. New Tech, as I recall, is in 28 states now, almost 200 schools. So, and 20 years in operation and constantly adjusting, innovating, applying what it's been learning. So I don't have to do this by myself. That's what's most exciting to me. And so I'm part of a community, and that community is sharing constantly, and I'm getting the best of that experience and able to apply it in my own situation. That's the communities that have developed around deeper learning, I believe, are what will truly propel it. Look, we've got probably, let's say, 800 schools that I would consider transformed. New Tech is involved in some, others are involved in any. We have 15,000 high schools in this country. We have 100,000 public schools total. And so we've got a lot more that we have to reach in a pretty short period of time. And that's why I think communities are important, and New Tech, a network like New Tech, is vital.
Great. What else do we want to?
I think that's good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What else did you want to say that I didn't get to ask you about? Do you want to go into the state I just didn't want to go down the policy path too much at a time when there's so much uncertainty.
So, well, let me say some stuff, and you decide whether it ends up on the cutting room floor. If I were a state, or particularly a district leader, I'd be thinking right now, wow, lots changing around me, and I'm not sure where do I want to end up on this policy business, what's going to happen. And my response is, this has never been a better time for a district leader to step up and do what he or she knows needs to be done. The reason is that whatever you thought of No Child Left Behind, it's gone. There is much total flexibility actually nowadays under the Every Student Succeeds Act, the federal law. And the reality is you're going to be asked to do one thing. You're going to be asked to, over the next 3 to 5 years, prepare a plan for how you're going to implement certain aspects of accountability, assessments, intervening in your lowest performing high schools. That's it. What a great situation, because now you get to take that sheet of paper that you've always wanted to write on, and you're going to be able to develop your own approach, your own implementation. You know the goals that you want to set, the deeper learning goals, you put them down. And then you go from there and you say, how is it that I want to get there in my district, and with personalized learning, with meeting every student where they are, giving them the project-based learning or other means of engagement for true deeper learning outcomes. And what's the technology that I want to employ? What are the interventions that I think are important? That's all going to be at the district level. I think it's one of the most exciting times possible.
Vincent Trinh to the Student Center. Vincent Trinh to the Student Center.
We were so close
Yep.
before we had the outside things. Do we need that last bit to the set again?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think if you pick up from, there was
It's gonna happen some more.
yeah, the sound, okay.
Yeah, we're releasing here in a few minutes.
It was just the last line, the most exciting time.
Do we have time, Randy, to try that?
You can
again?
try.
Okay.
So this is one of the most exciting times, I think, for a district leader. You get to actually sit down with a piece of paper in your board and say, this is what we want for our students and student learning outcomes. We know what we want. We know what we want to do. How do we implement it that's responsive to our own district? And incidentally, are there groups such as a New Tech that can help us? To me, if I were a district leader, take this opportunity and run with it. You're not going to get this, I don't think, again, and you're not also you're not going to have the chance to shape education and make the kind of changes you want to make. This is a unique opportunity in American education.
Great. That's great. Great. Anything else? Peanut gallery, you good? Randy, anything else you want to grill Bob on? Go ahead.
I just want to know when we're gonna align performance to actual deeper learning outcomes.
One of the questions that we had thought about was whether we could get into a layman's discussion of formative assessments, summative assessments, and the whole assessment thing. That's such a big topic.
So okay, well, let me wing it for just until the bell goes. One of the exciting things to me is how assessments are going to be changing. And with deeper learning, simply taking a multiple choice test or even just solving math problems isn't sufficient anymore. It's going to be performance tests. I think students in the next 10 years are going to be increasingly using digital portfolios and carrying them with them. And so if you don't like standardized testing and the old regimes of testing, good news is that a combination of improved research, improved pedagogy, and improved technology means that it's all going to be changing. We have to make sure that these assessments truly help students to learn, whether they're the formative assessments or the summative ones, and also recognizing that a one-day assessment isn't going to be what determines a child's future in the future. It's going to be a series of events in their learning process.
That's good. That gets it.
Can you make that happen next year?
She has a high school freshman.
last
She
year.
doesn't like that. Yeah.